This episode, I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Overall, in my opinion, this is the best movie in the series, with the right combination of action, suspense, and sci-fi built right in. Terminator 2 is a sci-fi action movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as the T-800, who is sent back in time to protect the future leader of the Resistance, John Connor. John Connor in the future had captured this T-800, reprogrammed it, and sent it back to protect himself. Confused yet? The time travel aspect is admittedly obtuse. Who does he need saving from? Well, the T-1000, of course, who Arnold Schwarzenegger describes as, it's capable of taking various shapes and even looking like people to be able to blend in with its surroundings. It's a sort of assassin robot. He can form blades with his hands or become a liquid metal. The T-800 is behind the eight ball, so to speak, compared to the T-1000. It's an obsolete machine in comparison. He's slower, he's made of solid metal as opposed to liquid metal, and only his outer superficial flesh will heal. These two get into several skirmishes throughout the movie. Often, the T-800 is damaged and the T-1000 heals very quickly. John, right off the bat, he's as edgy and angsty as a teenager can possibly be. He's also resentful towards his mother, who, after the events of the first movie, dedicated her time to trying to make him the leader of the Resistance, something that no one believes her is going to happen in the future. His punk of a friend drives him to the mall and they hang out at the arcade, where both machines converge on him at the same time. After an intense battle where the machines trade blows, John grabs his friend's motorbike and tries to escape. John gets away on his friend's motorbike and tries to escape. However, the T-1000 jumps in a semi-truck and quickly catches up to him. John would be run over and killed right then and there if not for the T-800. They escape together, and the T-800 explains everything to John, who is obviously having a hard time believing him. The T-800 tells him that his mother, as well as his foster parents, are also targets. No. The T-800 tells John that his mother is another main target aside from him, but his foster parents could be used against him. Once the T-1000 finds them, he will use them against John and eventually kill them. Meanwhile, John's mother, Sarah, is in the psych ward I mentioned earlier, foretelling the story about how a killer robot tried to murder her before she could birth the leader of the Resistance. I mean, who wouldn't believe her? Anyway, she's jacked now. Where in the first movie, she's very timid and slender, in this movie, she's ripped and does a lot of... There's even some implication that she's hurt the lead doctor a couple of times. So as I showed in my last episode about Terminator the series, the last Terminator was all but destroyed at the end of the first movie, with the exception of a couple of parts, except for one arm and his processor. Cyberdyne, the company that is going to doom us all in the future, ironically takes those two pieces and begins to develop what will become the very machines that will kill us. Again, I think the time travel is a little obtuse, because if the machine from the future never came back to the past, Cyberdyne never would have actually had the technology in the first place. After his foster parents are killed by the T-1000, and he realizes the T-800 will obey his every command, they head to the psych ward to save his mother. As the T-800 will obey his every command, they head to the psych ward to save his mother. When they get there, Sarah has already hatched a plan to escape by pretending to be comatose. One of the workers there apparently has taken advantage of people while they are comatose, or at least that's the implication when you see this scene. As she's trying to escape, John and the T-800 show up, full of medication again, as they get to her. However, the T-1000 shows up at the exact same moment to take them out. Once again, after they escape, due to a great action sequence, Sarah takes John and the T-800 to a ranch out in New Mexico. During the journey to the ranch, the T-800 describes to John and Sarah how a man named Miles Dyson is going to create Skynet, which is basically the future AI that kills us all. A huge cache of weapons is actually waiting for them at this ranch. They take everything they possibly can carry, including a grenade launcher, and during this time, Sarah watches as the T-800 and John form a sort of father-son bond. It seems the T-800 is starting to understand a little bit more about humanity. Telling John, but he figures it out and goes with the T-800 to Dyson's house. Sarah tries to assassinate Dyson, and while he is injured and she enters the house, his family jumps on him to protect him. When the T-800 and John show up, eventually they have a discussion about what happens with Skynet in the future. The T-800 shows, in gruesome fashion, and the processor to never let Skynet become sentient. As they're destroying everything, the police show up. Dyson is fatally wounded as the police come in and start shooting. Dyson also happened to be holding the detonator for all of the explosive barrels that they've placed around the facility. Meanwhile, the T-800 is finding just about every way to injure every police officer without killing them, because technically, they are on the innocent side as opposed to the T-1000. At this point, the T-1000 arrives and takes control of a helicopter flying overhead. This is the largest scale skirmish that has taken place in the movie. After the helicopter and the truck both get destroyed, the trio jump into a tiny truck, while the T-1000 gets into a truck carrying liquid nitrogen. They all end up crashing into a steel mill. The T-1000 walks through the liquid nitrogen pouring out of the semi and is frozen in place. The T-800 shoots him and he shatters, which is amazing to see, but also sort of stupid in retrospect. Due to the molten metal around it, the T-1000 starts to liquefy and pool together to become the T-1000. The T-1000 finds Sarah and tries to get her to bring John back by torturing her until she calls his name. She definitely doesn't want to do that because she knows that once the T-1000 sees John, he's going to kill him and her. The T-800 has jumped onto a conveyor belt. After tossing that arm and microchip from the original T-800 into the molten metal, the T-800 knows that it has to be destroyed too because of its technology and especially its processor that created Skynet in the first place. Understanding now why humans cry, but unable to do it itself, it gets lowered into the cauldron, and as it melts away, it gives one last thumbs up. At the end, Sarah Connor is on a winding road, talking about optimism for the future. This is one of the first sci-fi movies that I remember ever watching, and it just has such a special place in my heart. I love the dark aesthetic of the 90s generally, and as you can tell, there's a little bit of a theme with Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. And as you can tell, there is a little bit of a Arnold Schwarzenegger theme here. The transformation of Sarah from the first movie to the second is not only understandable, it's a requirement for this movie to continue. It's such a well-written character, and also, to see that character development is really intriguing. So much of this movie also is shot in the dark or at night, which kind of reflects the bleak future that they are all in if John and Sarah are killed. The concept of the movie is just so amazing, and there's so many great things about it, as you can tell. But there is one elephant in the room that I wanted to address now that I've gone over the summary, and that is the timelines. Things seem to take place in the past to create the future, but then again, the future creates the past. So there is a little bit of obtuseness that I think is hard to reconcile. I did speak a little bit about the timeline strangeness in the Terminator 1 episode. I recommend you give that a listen or a view if you haven't already. But the arm and the chip that birthed Dyson's research to eventually create Skynet in the first place would never have been discovered if the T-800 in the first movie didn't come to kill Sarah before she could birth John. I actually don't really love time travel in movies or stories. There are times where time travel really is very topical and it's interesting, and I think that it can be done tastefully where it makes sense. But if it starts to fall apart or become a little bit of, well, if this didn't happen, then that never would have happened in the first place, then it starts to unravel, in my opinion. So one of the main problems I just have is when a character sparks events by coming face to face with himself or coming face to face with something from the future that's already happened. But that future then affects the past. It just becomes very obtuse and a little bit convoluted. However, that brings me to my writing focus for today. In my novel series, VL-15 is a machine with human memories. It doesn't know where they came from, and before it figures out what's happened, the world ends. 6 decades later, survivors in this post-apocalyptic world find it and unearth it. It's a unique model as far as they've ever seen, so in order to understand itself better, it goes back to the Machine City Terra 9 to learn the truth. Book 2 is about to come out December 1st, and this is going to continue Cora's journey once she realizes who she is and what she is. Something I thought was a challenge when I was writing the series, and as I continue to write the series now, is having some humans act like machines and some machines act like humans. But it's also about walking this sort of tightrope between having human characteristics and having even some like robotic ones as well. I don't want machines to come across as too human to overshadow those human characters I've also written. I think it's an important example from Terminator 2 to show how humans can act like machines and how machines can act like humans. The T-800 learns to be protective at first because it's supposed to be, and that's its directive. But as you see throughout the course of the movie, it learns to protect because it cares about the people that it's around. There's a character throughout this series named Omnis, who is a main bad guy that the hub and other characters have to face. Omnis is an assassin machine who's programmed to actually try to blend in with its surroundings in a similar way to the T-1000, albeit doing it in a slightly different way. However, something I was told by my editor while I was writing and editing this book is that Omnis actually was coming off a little bit more human than even Cora, who has these human memories. A balance has to be struck in sci-fi like this in order for the characters to feel well-rounded. If your machines are coming off a little too human, it can actually work against you as a sci-fi writer, and this is something that I learned in my edits in Book 2. If done well, however, and a machine is acting and looking like a human, it can actually be a great asset to your story. However, a machine that organically learns how to care like a human and want to help the people around them can actually be a great asset to your story. My character with the human memories, who's VL-15, learns that its name is Cora, and once it starts to peel back all of these memories and put things together, it really comes to learn more about itself. Then it has to make big decisions about its future. It's not quite the same as the T-800, but I'm using that as an example to show how humans and machines can kind of crisscross when you're trying to create these characters. Trying to balance human and machine interactions can be a challenge, so it is something that I do want to forewarn you if you're trying to write a sci-fi story with those kinds of characters in them. So, what did you think of Terminator 2: Judgment Day? What other machine characters come to mind that act human? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out my novel series, A Spark in the Ashes, with The Vital Link Part 1 and Code Lines and Bloodlines, which is Part 2. This is coming out December 1st. If Skynet does become sentient, I hope John Connor can save us all.